The storm's rage did not falter as Lady Elayne pressed her weight against the warped doors of Castillon Keep, sealing out a world that had become both enemy and judge. Every stone of her ancestral hall seemed to groan beneath the memory of feasts and funerals, echoes of 1,000 oaths whispered into the dark. The night was thick with the scent of rain and the faint copper tang of blood, a scent she would come to know as intimately as her own sorrow. Calum collapsed at her feet, the embroidered sigil of House Drast torn and muddied on his breast. His breath rattled in his chest, each inhalation a struggle against the pain that laced his side where the king's men had cut deep. Under the flickering light of guttering candles, Elayne knelt beside him, hands steady with purpose even as her heart pounded a traitor's rhythm. She had been raised to see him as the enemy, a name spoken only in warnings and whispered curses. Yet, as she pressed linen to his wound, what she saw was not a rival, but the boy who once wove crowns of wild heather for her in the hidden meadows beyond the keep. Outside, thunder shattered the silence, rattling the very bones of the castle. Elayne's every movement was haunted by the memory of a promise made beneath a birch tree years ago, when the world was still green and war had not yet stolen the innocence from their eyes. She remembered how Calum's laughter had sounded then, bright, unhindered by the weight of expectation or the shadow of coming doom. Now with every careful stitch she tried to mend not only his torn flesh, but the frayed tapestry of a bond, torn by duty and the passage of years. Whispers slithered through the corridors, rumors of unrest, the king's banners drawing nearer, the last loyalists of Drast moving in shadows. Elayne knew her father, Lord Vaerith, would not hesitate to give her hand in marriage to the king's favoured general as payment for loyalty. The thought of it filled her with cold dread. Yet here, in the hush between lightning strikes, she tended to the one man forbidden to her by blood and by birthright. She remembered the last time she had seen Calum before the war, a midsummer night, the orchard in bloom, the air thick with the promise of rain. No words had been needed as they pressed their foreheads together, sharing breath and silence. Now, years later, the silence between them was heavier, every glance weighted with the ache of memories unspoken. Elayne's fingers lingered a moment too long on Calum's wrist, feeling for the flutter of his pulse, a fragile thread tying him to life, and her to hope. In the shadowed alcoves of Castillon, every portrait was a witness to betrayal. Ancestors clad in gilt and steel watched with painted eyes, as if daring Elayne to defy the legacy they had forged in blood. She moved through the halls like a ghost, fetching water and bandages, her every step muffled by the thick rushes strewn on the floor. Each time she returned to the chamber where Calum lay, she half feared he would be gone, spirited away by the same fate that had claimed so many before him. The hours crawled onward, the storm's fury never abating. As dawn's first light bled through the arrow slits, Elayne allowed herself a moment's respite at the foot of Calum's bed. His breathing had steadied, but his brow was furrowed, haunted by dreams of fire and ruin. She brushed damp hair from his forehead, whispering a prayer she no longer believed would be heard. The keep itself seemed to listen, its walls absorbing every secret, every regret. It was in that fragile hour before dawn that a new danger revealed itself. A coded message slipped beneath the door, sealed with the wax of House Vaerith. Elayne's hands shook as she broke the seal, reading the words that would set her heart racing. The king's men would arrive by nightfall, searching every room for the traitor. There would be no mercy if Calum were found within these walls. In that moment, Elayne felt the full weight of her divided soul. She was heir to Castillon, sworn to uphold the king's law, yet her every instinct screamed for her to defy it. The memory of Calum's hand in hers haunted her, the way he had once traced the lines of her palm, as if searching for a future where their names could be spoken together without fear. If you have ever wondered what it costs to choose love over legacy, let the dread in Elayne's chest be your answer. Would you risk your name, your blood, your very life for a chance at forbidden happiness? The fire crackling in the hearth seemed to whisper its own question, daring any soul listening to remember the price of desire. Elayne knew she must act before the sun set. Every moment spent at Caelim's side was another moment stolen from fate, a fate she had long since ceased to trust. She moved through the keep with purpose, burning old letters in the hearth, scattering ashes across the flagstones. Each flame devoured another promise, another lie she had told herself about duty and honor. In the flickering light, she could see the reflection of her own eyes, hollow with longing, fierce with resolve. As she prepared a place for Caelim to hide, memories pressed in upon her. She recalled the night her mother died, the promise she had made to never betray her house. Yet now, with the enemy bleeding in her bed, Elayne questioned whether the true betrayal would be turning away from the love that had survived every siege, every winter, every decree. The boundaries between loyalty and longing blurred until she could not tell where one ended and the other began. Outside, the storm began to abate, leaving behind a world washed clean, yet heavy with dread. In the stillness, Elayne knelt by Caelim once more, her hand trembling as she pressed a kiss to his knuckles, a gesture so fleeting it might have been mistaken for a prayer. She could not say what the day would bring, only that with each heartbeat, the chasm between who she was and who she wished to be grew wider. The keep itself felt alive with secrets, every shadow hiding the possibility of discovery. Elayne moved with caution, listening for the footfalls of servants loyal to the crown, for the creak of armor in the halls. Each sound set her nerves alight, yet she would not turn back. She was no longer the girl who yielded to fear. The woman she had become was forged in fire and sorrow, a creature of midnight resolve. As the morning wore on, Caelim woke, his eyes clouded with pain and gratitude. He tried to speak, but Elayne silenced him with a touch, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw, as if memorizing every detail before it could be taken from her. In that silence, 1,000 confessions hung unsaid, the apology for years lost, the plea for forgiveness, the promise that if fate allowed, she would fight for them, no matter the cost. They had so little time, and every second was a blade pressed to her throat. Elayne's mind raced with plans, secret passages beneath the keep, the loyalty of old retainers, the hope that somewhere, someone remembered the kindnesses she and Caelim had once shown in the village beyond the walls. Yet for every thought of escape, another memory surfaced, her father's voice, stern and unyielding, reminding her that a single misstep would doom not only herself, but every soul who bore the name Vaerith. By high noon, the keep was hushed, the storm outside replaced by a different kind of threat. The king's men would come, and with them, the end of everything Elayne had known. She stood by the window, watching the road wind through the distant woods, her heart caught between dread and defiance. In that moment, she understood what it truly meant to live between worlds, one foot in the ashes of duty, the other in the flames of forbidden love. If you have ever felt your heart torn in two by choices that cannot be unmade, listen closely. The story of Elayne and Caelim is not merely a tale of star-crossed lovers, but a warning that the greatest danger lies not in the swords of your enemies, but in the longing that turns you against your own blood. As the day slipped toward its inevitable twilight, Elayne braced herself for the reckoning to come, knowing that every heartbeat brought her closer to the moment when love would demand its final price. A hush settled over Castillon Keep as dawn crept across the haunted stones. In those first pale moments, every shadow seemed deeper, every silence heavier with what had passed and what still lingered, unspoken and unresolved. Lady Elayne paced the length of her father's solar, the air thick with the scent of tallow smoke and the faint copper tang of old blood. Her gown, once a mark of her station, was now smeared with ink and the memory of Caelim's wounds. She pressed a trembling hand to her lips, remembering the brush of his fevered breath against her skin, how his eyes had pleaded for something beyond mercy. It was a look that made a lie of every oath she'd sworn to her house. Outside, the storm had passed, but the world remained raw and unsettled. The banners of House Varith hung limp and sodden, their proud sigil faded by the rain. Servants moved with quiet urgency, eyes averted, as if the keep itself shared in the weight of its mistress's secrets. Elayne's heart ached with every footstep down the corridor, haunted by the echo of her own choices. She had hidden Calum in the oldest part of the fortress, a cell carved into the rock beneath the chapel, where only dust and regret kept company. It was a place her childhood self had once feared, a place for the condemned. Now it was the last refuge for the one soul she could not bear to lose. She slipped through the narrow passageway, her fingers trailing along the rough stone. The chill seeped into her bones, but it was nothing compared to the cold that gripped her heart. In the dimness, she found Calum curled against the wall, eyes closed, breath shallow. The bandage at his shoulder was dark with fresh blood, his jaw clenched as she knelt beside him. He did not flinch from her touch, though she saw the pain flicker beneath his calm. Gently, she whispered a promise, one she had no right to make, yet could not leave unspoken. He listened, his silence as heavy as the iron chains that once bound these walls. Time unraveled in that underground tomb, measured by the slow drip of water and the distant clamor of soldiers on the ramparts. Elayne tended to Calum in secret, her hands learning the shape of his suffering. She dared not linger long, but each stolen moment drew them closer to the precipice. Sometimes, in the hush before dawn, their fingers brushed, just enough to recall the summer fields of their youth, when laughter had not yet been a crime and hope had not been a wound. Each touch was a confession, each shared breath a rebellion against the fate their fathers had written. Yet outside the keep's embrace, the world spun inexorably toward ruin. The king's men scoured the countryside, searching for the last heir of House Drast. Rumors seeped through the walls like damp, whispers of rebellion, of hidden allies gathering beneath the banner of the fallen stag. Elayne's father, Lord Maelor, grew gaunter by the hour, suspicion gnawing at his mind. He summoned her to his side, eyes sunken and voice ragged. He spoke of loyalty, of the blood price owed to their ancestors. She nodded, her answers smooth as glass, even as her heart splintered beneath the weight of his expectation. One night, as thunder rolled in the distance, Calum pressed a signet ring into her palm, a relic of his shattered house. His fingers lingered over hers, rough and unyielding, yet tender as any lover's touch. He spoke of a promise made in the ruins of Drast Hall, a vow to never forget the girl who had once dared him to climb the moonlit battlements. Elayne felt the old ache bloom within her, a longing so fierce it threatened to consume all reason. She closed her fingers around the ring, her pulse echoing the storm outside. In that moment she understood that love was not a balm, but a blade, sharp enough to carve away duty, cruel enough to leave only longing in its wake. But danger thickened with every hour. A loyal retainer, old Sir Roderick, caught sight of Elayne slipping from the chapel at dawn. His eyes, once kind, narrowed with something like accusation. He cornered her in the corridor, voice low and trembling with fear for her soul. He warned her that the walls had ears, that the king's justice was swift and merciless. She met his gaze with the resolve of a woman who had already chosen her own damnation. She begged his silence, her plea threaded with memories of kindness, childhood games in the orchard, whispered secrets beneath the apple trees. Roderick faltered, the battle between loyalty and love etched deep in his weathered face. He turned away, the silence between them an uncertain truce. But Elayne knew the walls would close in soon. The days blurred, marked by fevered dreams and the clamour of distant horns. Elayne and Calum carved out a fragile sanctuary in the darkness, sharing stories of what might have been. She told him of her mother's lullabies, of the night she first realized her heart belonged to the boy across the river. He spoke of exile, of the brothers lost to the king's blade, of the moment his world ended and hers became the only light in the ruins. Between them, the past and future collided, each confession a step closer to ruin, but also to redemption. As the siege tightened, Elayne knew the reckoning could not be outrun. Her father's health failed with startling swiftness, and the councillors began to circle like crows. One evening, as the sun bled across the sky, Lord Maelor summoned her for what would be his final council. His hand shook as he reached for hers, the veins stark against parchment skin. He spoke not of war or vengeance, but of regret, the choices that had led them to this brink, the love he had denied himself for the sake of a name. He pressed a faded letter into her hands, its seal broken and words blurred by time. Within, Elayne found the confession of an old betrayal. The alliance that had doomed House Drast was not born of justice, but of envy and fear. Her father's voice faltered, asking her forgiveness for the sins she must now bear alone. The truth shattered the last of her defenses. All her life, Elayne had been taught to honor legacy above love, to guard the family's name with every breath. But in that dying man's confession, she saw the futility of sacrifice built on lies. She wept, not just for her father, but for herself, for the years lost to duty, for the love she had tried so hard to bury beneath pride. The letter became her burden and her key, proof that the cycle of vengeance could be broken, if only she had the courage to risk everything. The next night the keep trembled with the approach of the king's army. Torches flickered along the outer walls, and the air was thick with the promise of blood. Elayne moved like a shadow through her ancestral halls, her resolve forged in sorrow and longing. She kissed her father's brow for the last time, whispering words he would never again hear. Then she slipped away, down into the chapel's crypt, where Calum waited with eyes wide and wary. She pressed the letter into his hands, her fingers trembling as she told him the truth of what had been done to his house. For a long moment, Calum was silent, the weight of revelation pressing him to his knees. Elayne knelt beside him, her head bowed in shame and hope. She begged him to flee, to use the confession as a weapon against the king's lies. But Calum's gaze burned with a different fire, the need not for vengeance, but for absolution. He cupped her face in his hands, rough thumbs tracing the path of her tears. He told her that forgiveness was a gift, not a debt, and that he would rather face death at her side than live in the shadow of hatred. Above them, the banners of House Vaerith caught the light of dawn, once symbols of pride, now little more than funeral shrouds. The keep was no longer a sanctuary, but a tomb built on the bones of broken promises. Elayne and Calum stood together in the crypt, the last heirs of dynasties ruined by the sins of their fathers. They shared a final embrace, hearts pounding with the knowledge that time was running out. In the hush between heartbeats, Elayne whispered her love, no longer a secret, but a vow stronger than steel or stone. If you have ever wondered what price you would pay for love, for truth, for even a moment of peace, hold this story close, for the storm is not yet spent. The world above was poised to shatter, and the last hope for redemption flickered in the darkness beneath Castillon Keep. The end was coming, swift and merciless, but for one stolen night, love was enough. Above the crypt, the world surrendered to chaos. The thunder outside had given way to the deeper roar of men and metal, the siege finally upon them. Each tremor of Castillon's ancient stones echoed down to where Elayne and Calum clung together, two souls briefly unburdened by the weight of banners and bloodlines. The air carried the scent of oil and smoke, the promise that nothing above would remain untouched by the flames. Elayne's breath was warm against Calum's throat as she traced the line of his jaw, memorizing every angle, every scar. In the darkness, she saw not the traitor whispered about in the king's court, nor the orphaned scion of a broken house, but the boy who had once pressed a wildflower into her palm and sworn, in a voice trembling with hope, that he would find her no matter the cost. Even now, with death stalking the stone halls, that promise burned brighter than the torches guttering above. Time was measured in heartbeats and distant shouts. Elayne's hands, still stained with ink and blood, lingered on Caelim's chest, feeling the thrum of life, proof that for one night, defiance had triumphed over despair. Yet outside, the world demanded its price. The heavy tread of boots grew louder. The king's men had breached the inner keep. The moment to choose had arrived, as merciless and inevitable as the dawn. They parted with silent understanding, eyes shining with all they could not say. Elayne reached for the iron key at her throat, the last symbol of her authority, her birthright as Lady of Vaerith and the keystone of Castillon's defences. She pressed it into Caelim's palm, her fingers trembling as she closed his fist around it. She told him that in the catacombs beneath the crypt, a hidden passage led to the wildwood beyond the keep's reach. The path was old and dangerous, but it was hope, the only hope she could offer. Above their heads, the banners of Vaerith and Drast burned together, their colours indistinguishable in the smoke. As Caelim hesitated, torn between flight and the urge to stand with her until the end, Elayne brushed her lips across his brow, a benediction, a farewell, a silent plea for forgiveness. She reminded him that escape was not surrender, but the first step toward breaking the endless cycle of vengeance that had consumed their families for generations. The world narrowed to the press of their hands, the hush of breath, the ache of separation already blooming. Then, with a shuddering resolve, Caelim slipped into the shadows, vanishing into the labyrinth where so many secrets had been buried. Elayne turned, her back straightening beneath the weight of legacy and loss. She ascended the crypt stairs, the echo of her steps a dirge for all that might have been. On the threshold of the hall, Elayne faced the king's soldiers, faces grim beneath iron helms, swords drawn and stained with the night's work. She stood alone, her gown torn and dark with dust, eyes reflecting the ruin of her house. The captain demanded to know where the traitor hid, his voice cold as the steel at her throat. Elayne met his gaze, unflinching, her answer ringing with the force of a vow. She told them the truth. The traitor had never been Caelim, but the architects of this endless war, the fathers who had bartered children for power and called it honor. The soldiers hesitated, the certainty of their mission faltering. In that heartbeat of doubt, the storm outside redoubled, wind screaming through shattered windows, scattering embers across the flagstones. Elayne's defiance became a beacon for the desperate souls, still loyal to her cause. In the confusion, the loyalists struck, blades flashing in the smoke, the last stand of House Vaerith, written in blood and agony. Caelim, stumbling through the catacombs above the rising waters, heard the clash of steel and the thunder of boots. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to risk death for one more glimpse of the woman who had taught him that love was not weakness, but the only force capable of shattering fate. Yet her words held him fast, her plea that he live, not for vengeance, but for the hope that one day the world could be remade. As dawn bled through the storm, Castillon Keep crumbled beneath the weight of its own history. The banners fell, the stones split, and the cries of the dying mingled with the song of the rising wind. Elayne, wounded and breathless, fought her way to the highest tower. There, as the flames licked at the ancient timbers, she looked west, toward the wildwood, toward escape, toward a future built not on old wounds but on the ashes of all that had come before. She pressed a blood-stained hand to the window, a silent farewell to the life she had surrendered and the hope she had set free. In the wild wood, Caelim emerged into the pale light, the iron key clutched in his hand, her name a prayer on his lips. He turned back only once, watching as Castillon's silhouette dissolved into smoke and memory, knowing that nothing would ever be the same. If you have ever wondered what it means to choose love over legacy, to burn yesterday's banners for the chance at tomorrow, remember this. Sometimes the bravest act is to let go. Sometimes kingdoms are not saved, but broken open so that something new, fragile, uncertain, yet fiercely alive, can take root. In the years that followed, the names of Vaerith and Drast faded from the tongues of men, whispered only in songs sung by firelight. But in the wildwood, where the ruins of Castillon slumbered beneath moss and shadow, a new story was written in the hush between heartbeats. Elayne and Calum, their scars hidden and their promises unbroken, forged a life that owed nothing to the feuds of the past. They loved in defiance of history, and in that love found the peace denied to their ancestors. So when the wind howls through empty halls and the moon hides behind thunder, listen for the memory of their vow, a promise that even when empires crumble, the embers of love may yet survive, waiting to kindle the world anew.